Okay, we're live. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to next episode of Future Proof. Today, I'm very happy to introduce you Steve, who is joining us. I mean, I've been working with Steve for the last 15 years, and we are partnering crimes with a lot of strategy thinking on technology, platform, impact on society and our future. So this morning we're going to chat about, technology architecture. We've been doing a few conversation on data, on what we expect on technology in the next few years, and I thought it would be very interesting to have a sort of very tech angle to the conversation. Morning, Steve.
Hi, morning. So yeah, as Sergio said, I mean, basically, I'm only here because this is the only way I could get Sergio and Alfredo, both of whom I've been working with for many years, to actually do a show in English so that I can actually understand what they're talking about. Because being an Englishman, my Italian skills are not what they should be, even after all this time of working together. So this was the only way to get an English version of the chat going. So here I am.
Yeah, that's great because actually I was missing a little bit having English conversation on those topics. But then obviously, you know, that depending on the market, now I'm based in Italy. I mean, I used to live in London for 22 years, so it was a daily habit, not speaking in Italian. But now back in Italy, you want to create content for the local for the local market. So we started actually creating the episodes in Italian. But anyway, let's kick it off. So I'll give you a bit of a summary of what we discussed in the previous episodes, and then I'll try to kick off on a couple of questions which I'm curious to have your opinion on. So we started chatting with data, which is something that we just discussed before going live. So we started centralized, non-centralized, but the whole argument has been kicked off by the social dilemma documentary that we saw on Netflix. No, we started really debating how scary it is, no, to have your data manipulated for objectives which you're not aware. I mean, I actually raised the point that I would believe that at some point Facebook and other, social network, they're almost becoming people right, because if everyone in the world is going to be based on their platforms, you cannot really expect the platform is going to run on a business model based on advertising. It's maybe they're going to become utilities. They become like water. I mean, I need to have water coming in my house, and I need to have internet and a connection to be on Facebook, on any other platform, because that's the way I interact, especially in a society with COVID. I mean, if we would not have digital, I think that the connection in business would be much worse than they are today. And now I get to the point. Actually, this weekend, after playing golf, I don't know for which reason, we started a conversation on future and technology. And what I realized is that when you talk with people which are domain expert, I mean, they're very conscious about the topic. No, they understand what's going on and they see the benefits. Whoever is not a domain expert tend to be really scared. Like, they see technology as a sort of invasive exercise into their privacy, which is gonna automate their behavior in a way that they don't want. So it's a sort of limitation to free will, right? Why people like us, I'm not sure if you are aligned with me, but I get excited when I see Elon Musk, which is launching Neuralink. No, I get excited. Imagine how crazy we are. I get excited by the idea that I could link my brain and my thinking to the superpower of a computer in a way that I would not need to sit at the desk and type my thinking in a blog. But by the time I'm strategizing, I'm pulling together a concept, I can have a sort of immediate and synergetic relationship with search, knowledge, understanding. I mean, that for me is what I call augmenting people power, no, our own skills. So the question is pretty much there one. I mean, what can prevent, from a technology perspective, going towards a sort of invasive and controlling technology rather than moving into augmenting our abilities? Easy question. Just because it's morning.
Let's kick off with a small one, right? But it's a constant tightrope, I think, that we all walk as we are all experimenting and exploring the emerging use of technologies. And you can fall off either side, right? As you walk across that, that ridge on the mountainside. Like there's a big drop on one side, there's a big drop on the other side, and I guess it's a question of openness to innovation, right? Because there's no right answers. It's constant, moral and ethical checks and balances of innovation. Something you try with the best of intentions may turn out to have been flawed from the standpoint of technology, security, privacy, like whatever it might be, and as a result, it seemed to be on the negative side of that line that you're walking on. Not intentionally, but then also that thing may also define an iteration, a next step in that life cycle. So, and it kind of takes on a life of its own. People innovate on top of it, but all from a standpoint where actually early decisions sort of led it down the wrong fork of invasive versus helpful, positive, augmenting. And those are always the risks. So those people that are fearful are probably right to be fearful in a way, because it's just as easy for innovation to go to take the wrong fork at times. Like the question is, how do we course correct when we recognize it? Who's we? Like what are the systems in place to apply that course correction?
But that's actually very interesting. Sorry if I stop you there. Actually, it's a very interesting angle. So would like to understand, do you think that we need the new technology tools? I mean, for tools, I mean, we have IoT, we have blockchain, we have artificial intelligence. I mean, this is some of the major innovation platform that everyone is working on nowadays. And, I've been, very interested in blockchain and trying to understand how it can improve into this process. On some angle, the word decentralization has been driving a lot of IT and innovation, digital philosophy when you build a product. Do you think it's correct? I mean, is that the solution in the word decentralization? Because the angle is, once you have a private experiment, they become so big that it's a monopoly. And that's I'm sorry to Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook all the time, but that's one of the biggest example, because in terms of social media engagement, Facebook is a monopoly. Over almost 2 billion people are sitting on Facebook. And at the stage, if you are a private company, how could you guarantee from a technology perspective the ownership of the data? Or will the digital ID, for example, come into place for governments to make sure that they create a sort of technology? And going back also, you remember what we were doing with Nui, it was always about the health passport. Like it shouldn't sit into an hospital, it should be owned by the user. So going back into that architecture where the sets of data, where everything belongs to the user, and then you move freely into technologies. Is that a sort of strategic approach that could solve the problem?
But I think the reality is all of those entities, whether it's a startup that becomes a huge tech co, whether it's a government who's figuring out how to be more modern and innovative, there are going to be initiatives that are tried from that position of centralization, right? And the reality is, at the end of the day, like, it's still centralized. At the end of the day, they're all competing to be the single source of truth for some subset of data. If it's health data, for example, there's plenty of entities, centralized entities, that are sort of competing to win the race to just have the critical mass of data that makes them the monopoly and the authority on health data, so they can extract the value, get the benefit, use it for research, for a competitive advantage. And fundamentally, the problem is that whole model needs flipping, on its head or inverting, or whatever it might be, a complete paradigm shift. And it's been talked about, there's a lot of intersecting topics, whether it's around, around the role of blockchain or level one protocols in enabling some of the architectural changes and technology changes necessary to make that happen. But at the same time, it won't happen unless there's a fundamental societal pressure, an event. I draw an analogy like completely sort of different, but I'm head of platform at Mural these days, and for the last 10 years, there's been a macro trend of visual collaboration, design thinking, right? A lot of organic trend towards businesses, enterprises, collaborating and communicating visually in organization, and it took this year, this pandemic, right, to the change in the law. Companies had to send people home, globally, right, for the first time, to basically force that kind of architectural change, like architecture and infrastructure change from a standpoint of how people in companies collaborate. The same thing, and the question is, could it have been an event like this that does, that's the trigger for other fundamental changes? I haven't seen, we haven't seen it yet, but maybe it's still the case that it's coming. That the fundamental pressure on, instead of enterprises, but on society to say that the only acceptable way for enterprise, for organizations to interact with my data is through this paradigm and not the existing one. And only when it's like there's a critical mass of acceptance that that's the way it should be done, then the tools come into play that that enable that. But until that mindset and that demand is there, that is the new normal, then it will be a slow and organic trickling of movement towards that, right? Whilst go on.
I would say, because sometimes I go back, I don't know, another phase of history when maybe you had, I don't know, the first train, which was invented, right? And at that time, transportation and logistics were fundamentally changed. But I'm assuming that if private people and private company would have decided how the whole rail infrastructure would have been designed, we would have maybe a train passing in front of our yard, right? Because I tend to think that private decision making, it's about opportunism and cost effectiveness. So if you have two major corporations, they would just, I don't know, design a line that goes from one to another one, so they're gonna move to each other, finished product and manufacturing, for example.
They'd move you out, they'd knock down your house and they go through it. They do that.
So at that time, it was very important, the role of governments, institute, whatever it was, you say the type of either democracy or whatever governmental infrastructure, to sit down and understand how to orchestrate this sort of technological change, right?
Or be forced, right? So like the whole situation now is not that the government had an epiphany on, how companies should remove the centralization around a headquarters, should work more remotely. They had no epiphany. It was forced. There was a change in the law. It had to be done. As a result, there's a new normal for a lot of companies that are now getting rid of their big, expensive, head offices. So the question is like, is it futile to expect an organization like a government to level up their skills and abilities to make those kind of pragmatic and future thinking solutions? Or does it take a crisis to just to force these things to happen? And what crisis would it take to make a change like who owns my health data? How is it stored? What is the acceptable way for a value exchange to take place between me choosing to share my health data for a company to do their research to find a new drug, to whatever it might be? What crisis might force that to take place?
Maybe what we got going on right now, and I think you need another ingredient. You need a crisis in your own society but you also need another superpower coming up. And nowadays, if you look at China and you look at the COVID, you have both going on. You have a solid crisis in.
How does that relate? How does the superpower and the...
But the fact that you see someone else becoming quicker than you in understanding these steps and actually implementing this paradigm shift and this technology infrastructure in a different way, in a quicker way, in a more effective way.
But
And then you see,
like a space race, right? Like there's a little bit of like institutional competitive competitive threat combined with
but I think it is. I don't know. I'm one of those that believe that China, I mean, has lost the first and the second revolution, industrial revolution, because they were very much behind. They grew the economy in the last years by attracting manufacturing because labor was cheap and it was convenient to actually go and manufacture. That was the basic decision. And then at some point they've been very smart because now, I mean, they're launching the first central bank digital currency. They've been developing a technology infrastructure where, I mean, you have a monopoly, but it's a wanted monopoly. No, the difference, which I'm saying, I mean, we've been debating as well. I would like to have your opinion. We've been debating as well on the TikTok and WeChat ban from the US. And then for me, it was a clear example. It's about to say, actually, people data are very important. I'm going to have to build my next phase on the economy, on artificial intelligence data, and digital services which going to help me become profitable, more efficient, more effective. I mean, that's the goal, right? Data going to help me to improve whatever I cannot do with piece of paper and decision making in the traditional way. So, I mean, I have to be careful to have other countries coming into my own land and sucking those data and maybe steal away that opportunity. And then you sit down and you say, actually, Facebook and Google, I don't think they exist. I don't know, maybe Google, yeah, I don't know. I maybe you know better than me. They don't exist. Facebook for sure. They don't exist in China. And the response was, so we can now have I don't know, the competitor from that part of the world to sit in our economy. So the decision has been everyone goes on his own, and we develop it. But I mean, the Chinese market, I think, designed Alibaba, WeChat, and all the systems in such a way that today they have, I don't know, payments. I think on WeChat you run everything. You can pay your taxes as much as you can pay for the goods into a restaurant. Why Facebook is scaring the world and is not able to implement a payment system. Because I mean, I'm sure you followed up the whole Libra exercise. They tried also in Brazil to include payments into WhatsApp, and they've been banned somehow on the service from the local central bank. So it feels like that in our world, those solutions they grew up to a point that they are scaring society and scaring especially politicians and institutions. While on that side, they've been growing together, and that's a hell of a difference, right?
Yeah, I did. Assuming that the whole thing wasn't just Trump throwing his toys out of the pram and saying, "I don't like that app. We won't have it in the US."
No, I know, but we dream, right? So we like to build intellectual arguments out of something that might be very stupid. No, I always say that the decision to break the church has happened because a king wanted to divorce one wife because he liked another one. So it was such a human decision that created such a change and a cultural shift. So I agree with you.
Ordinarily, I'd be very optimistic that there was some sense and rationalization of a deep strategic kind of position on it. And on the other hand, I'm 50-50. I'm walking that tightrope of it was just Trump having a bad day because, someone TikTok some stuff that he didn't like. But I mean, that makes sense. I don't know. I don't think I have I do see these are all sort of converging factors that may force a change. And maybe it's not this phase, but who knows how many phases, who knows how many, if it's not COVID-19, it's the next one, right? That may not be that far ahead. And we may weather the storm, relatively speaking, of COVID-19, right? People are going to suffer. It's hideous. Businesses, are going to not survive. But as a society, we might survive it. We might come out the other side. But how many blows like that can we sustain? And at what point does it force other monumental shifts in the way things are done?
But do you think that the changes of the last few months are here to stay for longer and we're going to build on it, or they're going to somehow half disappear after the pandemic is going to be somehow?
It's a new platform. I think it's a new platform. And all of the humanitarian issues aside, in a way, that's also, for someone who's been tracking, organic changes to a lot of these macro trends over time. And it's been slow because it's such a massive shift. For that to be forced in a short space of time, what it's done is addressed all of those fears and preconceptions, that were not being addressed because of the fear, because of the uncertainty. And that was why things were moving so slow. When your hand is forced and you realize, that an organization can be more productive, can reduce costs, can access talent that exists globally rather than in a locale, not have to relocate people and all of the logistics that entails, and that there are tools, there are visual thinking patterns, there are processes and playbooks that now we can use as a huge multinational organization, not just reserved for little startups. That fear and uncertainty is gone in many ways. It doesn't replace. It creates new problems, right? It creates new problems where people are stuck in their home, 24/7 work. There's no separation between, home and work, and people are sort of struggling to distinguish between when I'm working, when I'm at home. Burnout becomes an issue. Physical exercise becomes an issue.
But that is something that good discipline and good habits should solve.
But people don't have good. So this is the thing, right? You go to the office as a regular person. Part of going to the office is about having a routine, and people no longer have the routine that they knew, and people are generally not good at discipline and and good habits. Like that's just, as a human race, we are fundamentally flawed in that regard. So there has to be additional cultural change in the organizations, the support systems. HR has a massive new job to do. The people operations side of things has a massive new job to do, to think about those new those new challenges that they face. But you can't rely on individuals to just be disciplined and be like, if we had that, we'd have no problem, because everyone would have actually respected lockdown, everyone would have respected social distancing, and we wouldn't have second waves and third waves or whatever is coming.
No, I was thinking somehow about us, because we've been working together for the last 10 years plus. And I think, you always been like super expert and super focused on managing distributed teams. So somehow now we're getting into your world. No, that's what I wanted for the last 10 years. No one is going to ask me anymore, finally, to walk into an office and we're going to just run business in a distributed way based on technology platform. We're going to increase productivity, collaboration, and actually increase the cost and make more efficient project managing. Somehow that has always been the goal.
Mm-hmm.
I learned out of this experience because I used to work in the city, so I used to survive on that routine.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, I didn't struggle that hard to put myself with the TRX in the morning, 20 minutes before I get a part of having a small study, which is that's actually a study which is say that people are upgrading their home. There is a trend nowadays that everyone is selling their house and actually going and look to buy the extra bedroom, because at least they want the office in the house that is gonna help the sort of routine.
Yeah, but
And
there's a
trend is sorry, and another trend is actually people moving out of urban centers, which is actually what you have done, right? Like, I work out of the countryside. That's where I love to be. That's where I want my family to grow. That's where I like. And still, you've been doing your business for the last 10 years successfully without major problematics, right?
yeah.
So if you did
Well,
it, I mean, everyone can do it. That's the joke, right?
yeah, I know, but I'm very, very aware that there's a degree of privilege, right, that comes with that. So my ability to decide where I want to live, it's not without having, worked very, very, very hard and at times faced very difficult, challenges and decisions. But it still comes from a degree of a privileged position, compared to the struggles that people face now. So there's a lot of, it's not just about being, not just about being disciplined, but it's the culmination of all of these factors, the relationship of struggling financially because I'm working from home, but actually I'm trying to find a new job perhaps, right? Because the thing that I used to do doesn't exist anymore. And I don't know how to pay my rent, but then I've still got to work. But now I'm figuring out how to work in a new way. I've got 2 children, 3 children, 4 children. I'm in a flat in London. This is not me, obviously, but these are the realities that people face. I'm very, very lucky, right? I made a good decision to move into the countryside to a place that's I'm on a farm that has fiber internet. What a great privilege for me in this time, to have made that decision just in time. So I'm able to work for a global company, a rapidly growing technology startup, from my little farm in the south of the UK. I'm incredibly lucky to be able to do that. But even I, in that situation, still struggle constantly as a human to balance the work to be done, the new challenges of collaborating with a growing team. Like Mural has grown from, I think, 160 people when I joined earlier in the year, April, May time, to 400 plus now in a short space of time. All these people trying to figure out how to work in a remote way, figuring out when's the right time for a video call, how can we work asynchronously better, how can we learn to not just write documentation but actually take the time to read documentation, to think critically about it, rather than just having another conversation and filling up calendars with meetings. It's really hard. It's and it's posed new challenges for me, because while I was maybe 1 in 10 or 1 in 20 or 1 in 50 people who were working and living like that, because everyone else wasn't working and living like that, I had a degree of kind of freedom. But now everyone's working like that. It's like a massive just a massive onslaught of asynchronous noise all the time, and actually handling that at scale is a brand new thing to me, really, because I was always in a degree of isolation. So yeah,
Yeah, because if you don't have the processes well designed, so you just fit into a process. But if you have a team of 100 which is working at the same time, defining the processes to actually be more effective, it's almost anarchy. You risk that everyone is experimenting his own things, and the noise becomes too much to bear somehow, right?
Yeah, and while some people are more advanced, having done that for some time, it's not to say that what was being done for some time translates to scale, right? When you have a playbook that works for a team of 5 or 10 people, does that same playbook work when it's an entire organization of 200 or 50,000 people, right? That we now see with the larger organizations that are having to figure this stuff out.
And what's the process? What's the process to actually, I don't know, make sure that you can not coordinate, but maybe a better definition is agree with a team of 100 or even 100 plus, just taking 100 because it's an easy number, a proper process and actually don't risk to lose traction over managing people and then start getting into an autocracy, right? Like, I'm the boss, I'm going to tell you that's the way we do it, because at some point, the risk is that you get to a point that you cut the process and you say, I'll tell you how it works, because otherwise we're not going to be able to get anything done. What's the skills that requires this sort of continuous collaboration? And
yeah, it's really hard. It's a combination of having a strong cultural perspective, right? That comes from leadership, comes from the top. It's about saying, this is what we value and this is what we don't value, right? And building a cultural playbook around that translates into things you can do, right? So, some companies, that struggle with people being burnt out from too many meetings, enforce, there's simple things like enforce an embargo on meetings on certain days of the week, right? Simple little tactics, but you can't do those simple little tactics in that. They have to come from the top, and they have to cover, an entire organizational kind of playbook. They're simple things, but they have to be done universally. Otherwise, you can't have one team that has, Wednesday no meeting day, and other teams that are just, meeting on Wednesday and trying to get things done. Like it has to cover, it has to come from deep, right? And then there's, in a way, the exciting thing is that there's also a new platform for innovation, right? This new platform of the way teams are structured, the problems that they are facing, and the incumbent ways of doing things that don't fit anymore, is a massive opportunity for new products, new tools, new services, right? A whole ecosystem of things that work together. So, we've seen a lot of focus recently on improving the way teams workshop, right? How they come together at scale, remotely, and run creative processes. But while that was a massive improvement, right, because people couldn't get crammed into an office and get around a whiteboard, I mean, it unlocks some opportunities, because now you can do that with 200 people and not the 15 people that happen to be in the office that can fit in that one room at the same time. So there's opportunities, but it also makes it poses new problems, which is, how do you then take the output of that workshop, that great creative session? How does that translate into a plan, something actionable? How do you take the sticky note that represents this epiphany of an idea on a board and go to the necessary depth to actually flesh out what that idea really means? So, like, what are the nuances? What are the challenges? What are the complexities? And how do you connect the two, right? How do you connect between the deep work to be done, the work in between the meetings and the sessions? There's no answers to that. These are new. These are challenges that have never been seen before at this scale, when everyone's working in this way.
that's great. Actually, let me ask you a question. Like, going back to the topic of the episode today.
Oh yeah, what was it?
if actually understanding how to manage this process becomes intellectual property of the team, because assuming at this stage this is something that we discussed even back in the past. It's not anymore the IP, the technology is becoming overrated. So that's specific. Maybe an algorithm can be an IP, but the infrastructure, the architecture, the app, how the platform works, it's assembling pieces. So actually what makes the difference is how I assemble and use the pieces rather than the pieces themselves, right? We at some point discussed this sort of principle. So if we go in that direction, it means that the platforms which I use on a daily basis, and maybe Mural comes into the picture, but maybe a lot of other platforms which I run these sort of processes on, they're going to understand how more effective one team is compared to another one. So how more effective a company is compared to another one. So we go back to the social dilemma. How am I sure that at some point, I don't know, if I got artificial intelligence coming into play, suggestion to come into play, so platform which are start gonna tell you, listen, if you pay a little more, I can actually help you to run a more effective schedule, meetings, processes. So at the stage, I mean, the process someone else knows very well.
Mm-hmm. But it's definitely an opportunity that now presents itself like it's never done before, right? Like,
How am I sure that it's not going to be used to invade my space rather than protect it and give me the tools to actually grow better? I mean, there's a
you,
technology angle on that or no?
it's an ethical one, right? Well, the first thing is, like, is the future of that layer, right, where the digitization of all those playbooks and processes, the new knowledge that is gained, the new insights gained from that, will the layers that get built on top of that provide that level of insight, that provide the nudges, the recommendations, the suggestions, and the content of those, are they all provided by a centralized party? Is it an ecosystem, right? Is it and there, I think the reality of like AI and machine learning applied today is not that there's just one big sci-fi brain that provides that whole layer. The reality is that, at least for the foreseeable future, there's the application of those technologies to solving very niche, very specific goals, like anomaly detection engine to figure out and nudge you when you're going to miss a meeting, right? And yeah, it has access to a certain amount of features and other data sets that are relevant to being able to predict that anomaly. And to then have some user experience layer on top of that to engage with the individual who was going to miss that meeting, to remind them that meeting exists, and here's a little bit of extra context for that. But the reality is that will be provided by someone who cares passionately about solving that problem versus another organization, another small company, another large company that cares passionately about solving another particular niche problem in there. And I think if that happens and it's an ecosystem, then there's at least an opportunity for that ecosystem to define the ethical standpoint, define to inherit more of society's perspectives on how that should be done versus the kind of sci-fi vision of that supercomputer centralized brain that has an evil side waiting to come out in the future. That doesn't really exist.
No, I'm always thinking that at some point you always get into centralization. No? So the more you start with the decentralized input, so the example of the person passionate about one problem is the decentralization on one function of the whole process, which is developed externally with a sort of ethical perspective. But then when all these functions comes together, they come together and they tend to centralize themselves. And when they're centralized, you don't have just one function. You have all the function into a centralized environment or ecosystem that somehow can be hacked. And that was the Facebook example. No, we are an amazing ecosystem where people truly are sharing what they love in life, but then we discovered that someone has been using our habits to actually manipulate elections, and on the other side, actually also feed us information to make us more how you say, agreeing with a sort of point of view rather than another one. And that one scared the shit out of me. Like, I'm thinking in the morning sometimes when I do my research and I say, fuck. I mean, if now people are just showing me, or Facebook or Medium or whatever I'm using, it's just showing me just what I've been searching for. Because maybe I was searching for Bitcoin is going to take over the world, and they just show me, keep on giving me content to prove that that's the real angle. And I'm missing all the other side. That's the question I sometimes, maybe I'm stupid, but that's the question I'm asking myself. And that's why sometimes I open different accounts. I'm sometimes get paranoid. Like, how am I sure that I can access all the information in a sort of very neutral way and someone is not manipulating my content access? And that works on every level for technology, right?
Yeah, and again, that's like, you got to do your diligence, right? And if you're asking yourself whether you should be relying on a Facebook newsfeed to tell you, what you want to know about politics and current affairs, then you've already probably, you've gone wrong somewhere in that trap. But at the same time, that's a problem that every individual human being, faces. A question of doing your research, being diligent, or relying on the easy path, right, to get your information. And to be honest, that's never really gonna change. What I'd love to see in that example we talked about a minute ago, would be that the fundamental architecture, there is an opportunity at this point for the fundamental architecture to change, where, there's some projects, we're seeing it in decentralized finance, with projects like Radix, kind of building platforms that are meant to be built upon, like the next generation of platforms meant to be built upon, that fundamentally sort of change some of the earlier attempts, right, to have platforms for building financial applications. In a similar way, you then have, and I'm not too close to this project. I was looking into it quite heavily a little while ago. The Ocean protocol. They had some missteps, I think, when they did some of their early fundraising stuff. But the promise of a project like Ocean, which by design has kind of flipped that the data ownership model, right, and provided the tools and the features for actually, securing and encrypting the underlying data, for making the transactional systems, for sharing data, for how it can be used for different use cases. Like, if you start to think about building the underlying sort of experience on those types of platforms, the problem is it's still too early days, right? They're still too immature really to do that. But maybe in the latter stages of this phase that we're in, however long that goes, then those kind of platforms that address those types of centralization, challenges, they have an opportunity. I'd love to see things that we're doing in the old centralized kind of architecture way being imagined and being sort of built from a different architectural standpoint, like, and then you sort of change the tendency to just go the way things always go, where, yeah, you might have an ecosystem built of small things, and then there's convergence, and there's the leader, the market leader, that just absorbs all the little things and builds the big centralized monolith, at the middle. Like, that will continue to happen unless that fundamental architecture kind of changes.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I've been, I'm a big fan in blockchain, crypto, DeFi, whatever is going on that side. And there's always two angles which I really like to see. Number one is the governance. So especially if you go in decentralized platforms, so autonomous and decentralized platforms, where obviously when the technology is released, it's public. So the business model is not anymore in keep on improving that algorithm at the benefit of myself making money as an organization. But I mean, the changes into the product, they come up out of voting. So there is a government infrastructure that is going to involve the parties which are actually engaged in using the platform, which is a very nice angle, ethical and architectural angle, no, which I would like to see really happening more and more. And then another very interesting, which I'm curious to see whether you looked into it, is actually autonomous organization. So I saw a couple of seminars, not a subject which I really looked into in a lot of depth, but I saw a person that has done a very interesting webinar on the subject, that explained that Delaware might be the only jurisdiction in the world, according, because of the legislation, which you can actually have two human beings creating a company, then the governance of the company is going to be released to an algorithm. So, and it's a sort of way to say, I mean, I'm keep on using the Facebook example, but if the algorithm is going to say, I mean, you have to protect people data, you have to make sure that they're going to access all the content they want. I mean, the way that you uh, decide the feed into the wall of a human is always to be under this principle. And then you release it into an autonomous organization and you decentralize the algorithm, and you need the voting of all the people part of the platform to actually change certain parts. That's where maybe the architecture is going to change a hell of a lot, because you're not going to never adjust the algorithm, the functionality to make sure that you make more money, but you have to find a different business model to actually, and that's where maybe guarantee it's going to be more interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, this has been one of the fundamental promises or opportunities of this, of smart contracts and decentralized systems. We just haven't figured it out yet. I think it can be done. I think maybe not all organizations, but and maybe not all aspects of organizational governance, but probably a number of core processes and systems and decision-making practices, playbooks, operational playbooks, right? Can all be programmed, can all be governed. I just don't think we have the maturity, not the technical capability necessarily, but it's applying it in the real world. That's the problem. It's all of the chaos around, around how that works when people and emotion and situations arise that put pressure on those systems. And then there's the underlying, whenever it's programmed, there are vectors to find problems with the way that was programmed, and how you resolve those, and what are the systems in place to ensure the reliability and the availability of those things when faced with adversaries who would like to take them out. They're very tangible things that can be attacked at that point when they're locked in that way. So until the security layers improve around that, around how the testing and the validation of those rules can improve, but ultimately how they are actually applied in the real world, I think there's great promise for it. We're just it's just immature, really.
Yeah, I agree with you, but as a sort of strategic angle, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, I developed a bit of thinking by just chatting with you this morning, but I was saying maybe, I mean, releasing this governance to technology, it's a way to augment the people, because you say, I know that if I'm going to keep on changing the contract or changing the algorithm, at some point I'm going to fuck it up because I'm a human. The more power I get and the more I will want. So if I release it into an automatic governance, I'm going to do something good. I can still make money because I'm sure that those sort of infrastructure that can still have a business model, but it's like a contract, right? The first time I sit with a client, I do a very fair contract with my lawyers. Then I get the second client, the third client, the fourth client. When I get to 1,000 clients and I'm making a hell of a lot of money, maybe I'm the market leader for that sort of services, that's where the ethical comes into place. Either I start touching the contract and I make it very heavy for the clients because he cannot decide not to sign it because it's too important what I provide, or either I'm very ethical. And that's where maybe we need to put a sort of barrier by using technology, leveraging technology. The smart contract is not going to be changed. If he has to be changed, he has to change according to very difficult rules and the benefits of all the counterparties involved.
Yeah, and that's where it sort of fits certain use cases, like all the horror stories about pharma companies suddenly massively overpricing drugs just because they can, locking that stuff in contractually using technology, immutable technology. Kind of, there's definitely a use case. There's obviously massive resistance to that that would need to be overcome. But in a world where so much of decision making is the ideas themselves aren't mature and well baked enough to lock them in, and you need the fluidity, you need the ability to rapidly iterate. Like that's a really tricky balance. Like on one hand, would it be better if the UK government said, all right, here's a very concrete ruling on the next phase of lockdown, and it would be enforced through a smart contract that was programmed, and here's the criteria, and versus this week we're going to allow we're going to shut down golf courses, but actually we're going to review that now because actually maybe golf courses are all right. How much of that is necessary agility, and how much of it at its core should be principled to the point of being programmable?
I really hope golf courses are going to stay open because I've been playing every weekend recently. I got a sort of real back into my golf sort of mode, and I wouldn't lie. I mean, closed in the house. The last lockdown, I've done it in the mountain. I've been lucky enough. I mean, it was no week, so I brought my daughter up with the family, and then we never came back because we understood that everything would have been locked down. So we said it's better to be locked in the mountain than be locked in a city. Right now, the second round, it's about to lock us down in Milan, and I'm scared to have the experience. Anyway, Steve, listen, we got the 51 minutes, so I'm gonna maybe draw the conclusion here. If you have I don't know, if you have a couple of points you want to make as a conclusion. Otherwise, I mean, I would prefer maybe to keep the door open for a second episode with you. I mean, we had a very interesting few points raised in the conversation. We don't want to bore our audience with 2 hours one by one. We might want to split it into 3-4 appointments. So
sure.
I will maybe. Cool, super.
Yeah,
so we're gonna have you.
No real conclusions. It was just fun to catch up as always.
But there's never a conclusion, I think, on this sort. I mean, it's interesting. I always put it at the very base level. Base level is that is fundamental today to share knowledge. So having conversation with people that you know, with people that you don't know about topics which are relevant, and get the content distributed around is just good for society, and is good to, I don't know, come up with a better way to manage this transition.
Yeah, I mean, what the last kind of 4 years has taught me is it doesn't matter what we think is going to happen. Increasingly, the opposite happens against all odds, whether it's Trump, whether it's Boris Johnson, whether it, whatever it might be, whether it's Brexit. Like the ability to predict stuff is just futile. What you can observe is, what's happening and have opinions, and then adjust them as new information presents itself, and just to have an open dialogue about what you're observing, because it just changes so quickly, and it's especially these days, it's craziness. Who would have thought, right, that if we'd had this conversation in even January this year, what would have been, what would have been the year ahead? I mean, I know my plans for the year were very different to what happened, and I think that's the lesson. Really, is things are in motion, and.
But the only thing I realized, and I'm very thankful and grateful for the decision I made a long time ago to get into innovation, is, I mean, my wife last night told me, I've never seen you working that much. I've been working under lockdown and COVID more than what I actually worked, I don't know, back in the days in the city or other situation. And the conclusion for me is that I have the skills to readjust. So the fact that I'm distributing, I know technology, I mean, if I'm resourceful, I know I can survive the process and find ways to engage people and understand where the opportunities are. If I don't have the tools, I'm not resourceful. And at that stage, people just get back in square and complain. That's it. People struggle to talk with the lawyers. People struggle to get work done. People struggle to print documents. Just suddenly the routine is gone. That's it. Fuck, I can't do whatever I need to do. And I get into depression, anger, difficulties. It feels like I can't really do it. I don't have the tools and the skills to understand how to make this transition. And that's where things get complicated. So I think that
that's another good conversation, really, is what can be done in this new normal for people that aren't that privileged to, privileged or through, decisions taken and risks taken to move in this way. Like, what can be done to level up people that now face this new dilemma, right? What tools are available? What do they need to learn? What new mindset do they need to adjust to survive, but also to see that there are actually opportunities as well? Is it, do you just need a computer and an internet connection to survive, these days? And how do you use that tool to your advantage? What do you
That's
need?
good, actually. That's good, actually. Maybe that's an idea for the next episode, because when you talked about, I mean, HR and talent managers, that was the angle. Say, for example, how government and public can manage talent. Let's call it citizen talent. I know you've been very passionate in the past on educating, forming, actually, whatever it's about developing skills. So that can be an interesting episode to build together. What democracy should do to make sure that the 80% of the people that nowadays are maybe not prepared for this transition are gonna quickly catch up and be given the skills to survive. That can be an interesting angle.
Sounds good.
Cool. Thanks very much for joining us, Steve.
Welcome. It was great to catch up.
Cheers. Bye to everyone.
Take care. Bye all.